In any persuasive speech, audience analysis is a very big deal. Now, in past videos, I've shared with you why it is that audience analysis is important in, say, an informative speech, but it is equally, or even in some cases more so, important in a persuasive speech. You have to know where your audience stands before you can tell them where to go. So you need to know what it is that you are persuading with. So what's your starting point? Keep in mind a couple of things we've talked about in the past. Maybe demographical information would be of value to you. Do you need to consider their age or their gender or their socioeconomic status or what have you? Do you need to consider what their originating knowledge is on a topic? So how much do they already know about it? Or what they feel about your topic. That's a big one in public speaking when we're looking at persuasive speeches. What is it that your audience already knows and how do they feel about it? Because in order to be able to successfully persuade, you're going to have to keep these things in mind. One way to do this is to create surveys. And it's kind of a simple way to do it. You can use a digital survey making tool like SurveyMonkey and kind of write out the questions that you feel are most important to know about your audience. Whatever the topic might be, let's say it is health related, losing weight. If you want to do something along those lines, which is an extremely simple topic, however, it can be done in a lot of different ways. But if you want to do something along those lines, you first need to know where the health is of your audience. So are the vast majority of them health nuts and in great shape, or the vast majority needing to exercise or eat better? What is it that your audience has? So create questions that answer that would allow you to get that information. And consider responses that make sense for your particular speech. So what I would do is first research the topic just a little bit and try to figure out what it is you want to know about your audience so that you can determine the best way to get those responses that make sense for you. And then think about the varying types of questions that you can use. You can have open-ended questions that allows for your audience to sort of write out a response. You know, how do you feel about, or what do you think about when you hear blank, or whatever it might be. It gives them a chance to provide details that are original to them. You can also do Likert Scale, and that is kind of a range of things that says, all right, now here's a statement. I am very satisfied with my cell phone provider. And a Likert Scale says, I agree completely, somewhat agree, neutral, somewhat disagree, or disagree completely. So that would be considered a Likert Scale or Likert Scale. You could do something like that. You could also do fixed response. If you're doing, say, age groups, that might be an option. Are you between the ages of 16 and 19, 20 and 23, and so on? So you want to keep those kinds of options in mind. Whatever you choose, make sure that you are addressing your audience and you know what they need or what they may want to get from you when they hear your speech. Now, when you are ready to do this speech and you're ready to give the information, you have to consider those responses you got from your audience and then how you might use the research that you come up with in order to be persuasive. Now, there's three major areas of persuasion, or appeals to persuasion, as it's been called before. And logic is our first one. Logic should always be the foundation behind any form of persuasion. This is the main. There are many other forms, but this is the main one that I want you to focus on. Make sure logic exists thoroughly in your speeches. So support material can include things like examples of something you're saying. You may make a claim that some of the worst tornadoes have hit the Midwest in recent years. Okay, that's a claim. So in order to support that claim, find examples of that. Find statistics that show the change in severity of tornadoes or whatever the issue, hurricanes, or just weather in general. Look up expert interviews and commentary or experts that wrote books or articles on this topic. Find stories from experts or from people that have direct connection to the topic that truly supports what you're saying. use logic first and as the vast majority of what you're discussing. That's going to be your foundation. You can also consider the use of credibility as an option. And credibility is something that should come naturally, but in some cases needs to be stated more explicitly. So in the introduction of a speech, you might say, as an educator in the field of communications, I've been teaching public speaking for quite some time now. That would be a statement that gives you my credibility. If you don't have any direct personal credibility to the topic, you're not involved in it or work in the field or whatever it might be. Instead, you can say, I've been researching this topic for the past 4 weeks, and I've found that, and you can go into something like that. That gives you sort of a sense of credibility. Another option is just to make sure that you do your citations well. And I would actually combine all of these credibility options. So make sure your citations are clear. We know exactly who is talking to us. So John Smith, the head of blank, shares that. So if you hear an article or see an article from WebMD and it's Alice Frank, you don't want to say Alice Frank states that, because we don't know who Alice Frank is. So tell us who Alice Frank is. Alice Frank, a neurosurgeon in Southern California, shares with us that, and then you go into those details. So we need to know who or what that group or person is in order to feel a sense of credibility with that information. And then confident delivery. Try not to be too hesitant or too quiet. Remember, anxiety can sometimes hamper your delivery. We've talked about this in the past. What does it do to you specifically? And use countermeasures. Go and review the video on anxiety and see what comes up, and see if you can't make adjustments to your delivery skills in order to become more confident, or at least display more confidence. And the final one here is emotion. And emotion is sort of like the icing on the cake. You don't necessarily want to have emotion as the beef of the cake. Too much of it is very sweet and will probably make you sick. Instead, make sure that it kind of goes over everything in a light layer so that it works for the speech topic and doesn't hide the wonderful foundation that you've provided in logic. So how might you do this? How might you use emotion? Obviously, choose a topic you're passionate about and share that passion when you speak, with the choice of language and your tone of voice and all of those things. Another way to do it is to display images or short video clips that add that emotional level to whatever the topic is. So instead of worrying too much about whether or not you can say certain things to show the emotion, you can show those things. Another option is to use storytelling, whether it's your own story or a story that you found during your research. For example, going back to the tornado, the increase in tornado activity or severity, I might find an anecdotal story to kind of add that emotional level in a newspaper article or something along those lines. So that's how you're going to get that persuasion in. So keep in mind all three of these things as they were created and stated by Aristotle: logic, credibility, and emotion, also known as logos, pathos, and ethos, if you hadn't already figured that out, are certainly major pieces to persuading your audience. But before you can do any of that, you need to know who your audience is and where they're standing before you can ask them to move.